Nurul Ikhwan.
Thank you. Ambassador of European Union to the Republic of Indonesia and Brunei Darussalam, His Excellency Vincent Piquet, thank you for your time and your precious opportunities to be with us for today. And also other officials coming from various institutions from the central government as well as for the regional government from Indonesia, and leaders of the industry and also financial sectors in Indonesia. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning. And indeed, it is a great pleasure for me to here with you to sit together in at the end of almost the end of this year, but still we are thinking about something very important to be discussed as a kind of foundations for us in order to put Indonesia as a part of a global, a part of the movement of protecting of the environment of the earth that is so far the only planet that we are able to live in. Ladies and gentlemen, in the coming hours, this virtual stage will host an incredible panel of speakers from United Nations agency leaders to leaders, from His Excellency ambassadors to multinational bank development leaders. And so what is that brought us all together today? I could start with United Nations Sustainable Development Summit 2015, for example, where Sustainable Development Goals was adopted, or I could talk about our climate goals and emission cuts. I could tell you about the massive investment needed for the green transitions. I could begin with plenty of numbers of figures, but allow me to start with something that is much more intimate, something that is happening in the heart and mind of billions of people around the world. What truly brings us here today is the rise of global climate conscience. So, because of this, people across the world are changing the way they move and the way they eat. And yet, people are changing the way they invest too. Just 10 years ago, fossil fuel were still considered as a safe and wise investment. But today, people want to know that their investment will do not harm our planet. And increasingly, they demand that their money contributes to the fight against the climate change. It is a change in mindset in transforming the world of investment from big players, publics and private, to ordinary families who want to use their savings to protect our common home and our children's futures. Therefore, collective actions from global actors against climate change has become our top priority. So in the long term, the sustainable investment is the solutions to the climate issues. Every rupiahs or US dollars spent on sustainable investment does help our planet, and it equally helps consumers. But it is also an investment in resilience of economies. So we have to speed up our work on the sustainable investment. Ladies and gentlemen, the desire of invest in sustainability is higher than ever. The other side of the coin is that the world needs massive investment to finance the transitions to a more sustainable economy. Companies all across the globe are eager to go green and to develop the sustainable solutions for tomorrow. They have both innovative ideas, and often they only need funding to turn their objects into reality. So the questions we all face are how to link demand and supply of sustainable investment and how to mobilize the huge capital that the world needs to win the battle against climate change. And here comes today's policy dialogue. We have invited you to join us because of a commitment of the government of Indonesia took in updated NDC in 2021 to reduce emissions from 2022 to 2030 by 29% unconditionally and up to 41% conditionally against the 2030 business as usual scenarios, and increase unconditional commitment compared to 2010. Ladies and gentlemen, this is also something that we would like to discuss during today. And if I just may refer to Antonio Guterres, current Secretary General of the United Nations, he said that the climate alarm bells are ringing at fever pitch. And he is so right. Ambition needs to be backed by concrete plan. Because of this, then Indonesia as a part of global communities and Indonesia as a part of global economy, we don't want to be left behind, and we don't want also to be uncontextually considered as a country that will not be giving contributions into protections to our planet. If we fail in protecting our planet, we are going to be failed in protecting ourselves. So something that needs to be done by Indonesia should be also updated by the policy coming from the business players and also for international institutions. But then Indonesia is having a good willingness to do more contributions into this kind of protections and more green and sustainable investment and economy. Because of it, then the theme of green investment, blue investment, and recycled economy is on the top priority of our agenda in order to give the contribution from Indonesia with the biodiversities that we have and also with the limitations of capital and also technology that we have. We would like to have better collaborations, Indonesia and the world, in protecting our future for our generations and for our daily life. So enjoy for today event. We do hope that we could have a kind of a good understanding and we could start a better collaborations for our better tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ikhwan, for delivering your opening remarks today. Distinguished guests, please welcome Mr. Vincent Piquet, His Excellency Ambassador of the European Union of the Indonesia and Brunei Darussalam for the keynote speech. Good morning, Mr. Ambassador.
Selamat pagi. Terima kasih banyak for the invitation to me to speak to you this morning. It's really an honor for me to be joining you virtually, in my case, for this very exciting meeting, a meeting that combines both the political and policy dimension of fighting climate change and promoting sustainability, and at the same time that looks very carefully at the business dimension, how to mobilize businesses in Indonesia for investing in a green and sustainable production track, and how also to involve foreign companies, foreign investors in this effort. I greet most cordially Deputy Minister Nurul Ikhwan, also Deputy Minister Amalia Andingar Widiasanti of Bappenas, both of course very important partners for the European Union, for the EU member states in Jakarta, and representing institutions that play a key role in pushing the economic policy and investment agenda for Indonesia. I will speak not too long, I hope, and interrupt me when you think, Madam Moderator, when I should conclude. By just sketching you very briefly a picture from the European Union. Where do we stand right now at the end of this year, 2021, and trying to make a link to the situation and the position of Indonesia as a strong, important, large, powerful emerging economy in Southeast Asia, G20 member, tremendous role to play in the coming year in that connection as well. First, a word about the European Union. I think you can summarize our situation by saying the die has been cast. We have turned a definitive corner on the policies adoption and implementation for making the European economy, for making European society in general a net zero economy, a net zero society by the year 2050. That is only 3 decades from now. It looks far away, but it is, of course, in policy terms, the day after tomorrow. If you want to achieve a goal like that, you'll have to implement, take the measures right now, or else you will never succeed. But to do that, the EU has put measures in place. We adopted a climate law that fixed our CO2, our greenhouse gas reductions into law. 2 steps. Of course, the final step is net zero in 2050. But before that, in 2030, which is the cutoff year for the Paris Agreement on climate, fighting climate change, in 2030, we need to cut minus 55% compared to the year 1990, not 2005. As is the case for most countries, but 1990, and that's a lot more difficult, a lot tougher than, of course, a later benchmark year. Now, to do that, we presented in the middle of this year, before the big Glasgow COP meeting in November, we presented a package of 13 measures, 13 legislative measures under the title Fit for 55. And I'm not going into all of these, but just summarize them by saying that you can distinguish 3 kinds of measures and 3 categories of measures. And the first one is pricing measures, basically aiming to penalize dirty things, dirty production, dirty services, and to provide incentives for clean ones, low carbon ones. We have new energy taxation ideas on the table, and we have also the aim to include new sectors under our emissions trading system, sectors that were not originally included in that system. And particularly I'm talking about maritime and road transport. Pricing measures is category 1. Second category is raising targets, and targets for 2030, and of course also looking ahead to 2050. Targets for land use, for restoring forest. The EU will be planting 3 billion trees between now and 2030 in an effort of reforestation or afforestation, and also in an effort to boost the use of wood for construction and for energy purposes. And that, of course, is good for CO2 reductions as well. We will be raising our renewable share in the energy mix from the current 20% or so to 23% to 40% in 2030. So that is a fairly steep increase. And of course, that can be realized only by all sorts of supporting measures. And lastly, we will push hard for cleaning fuels in aviation. Up to now, aviation, the civil aviation industry is not a part of any global system. And the same is true for maritime transport, where there's a lot of emissions also happening unaccounted and without any limitations or carbon costing. The last category of measures is standards, and it's basically saying that our cars, whether it's private cars or whether it's minivans and the like, shall have lower emissions than they do than they have right now. So we'll be raising massively the share of electric vehicles in our car fleet across Europe, and taxing more heavily cars that have high CO2 emissions. Now, all of these are great measures, relevant measures. Of course, they won't work without a legislative push and without an enforcement push. That is crucial to make it work and to make sure that the participation by all economic operators is equitable and is fair, that there are no free riders in our economy, and that there are also no free riders outside our economy, producers that produce cheap, dirty products, to simplify, and would have an unfair advantage on the EU market, on our internal market, compared to companies that have invested in the greening of their production processes. So for that reason, the EU is now going to discuss what we call this carbon border adjustment mechanism. Now, lots of misunderstandings about this measure. It's not a tax. It is not a tariff for entering the market. It's not at all that. It is a measure to compensate for differences in price that result from differences in costing the carbon dimension of products. If a product inside the EU has to pay a lot for its production as regards the investment in greening, we want to avoid that the company of the product is tempted to go abroad and produce in a market where there's much less stringent carbon costing rules, and then import this dirty product, so to say, back into the EU. That's the type of carbon leakage that we wish to avoid, whether it's from European producers, our own producers, or producers from elsewhere. So this is a measure that we will be putting up shortly. My bottom line is of the question, how does this affect Indonesia? I would say that it need not affect Indonesia negatively in any way. Our basic approach is to reward countries that have solid and responsible carbon costing mechanisms themselves. In other words, a country with such a reasonable carbon costing system has nothing to fear. The second key thing, of course, is investment from the public coffers, but from the budget. The EU has a tremendous budget reserved for this, more than 760 billion euros for the next 7 years. a mixture of grant finance and loan finance. Grant finance, for instance, for financing projects that allow the coal transition. We have identified in Europe about 18 regions that are highly dependent on coal mining and on fossil power industry. And of course, in the coal transition, in the fossil energy transition, we have to support such regions, make the reforms from a fuel-based, fossil-based industry to a renewable-based industry. And for that reason, we will be carrying out a lot of restructuring projects at the regional level in those coal-dependent regions. I think this is something which we can and will share in experience from Europe with Indonesia, because at the end of the day, Indonesia, many Indonesian regions have to make a similar transition. A second type of investment is in sheer public infrastructure, for instance, in green transport, especially green transport infrastructure, especially infrastructure connections that go across the internal borders of the European Union. We have case examples of this in Austria and Slovakia, and in Spain, as well as Germany. Quite a massive greening of our infrastructure. It will be taking shape over the next year to improve public transport, diminish the use of private vehicles, and to also diminish the CO2 emissions in transport. Another interesting and very attractive investment that we will be rolling out over the next 10 years has to do with housing. And it's interesting for citizens, for households, but it's also interesting for the industry, for the construction industry. The analysis is very simple. About 15% of housing, of buildings in Europe right now are in the lowest category of, the worst category of energy use, of energy inefficiency, 15%, and we expect that those buildings will be mostly still standing by the year 2050. But the drive here is to make them greener and less energy consuming. So the goal is to raise these 15% of all European houses and buildings from the worst energy consumption level to the next level in 3 years' time. And secondly, by 2030, and then to keep on raising them to the subsequent level every 3 years, and so on. So all in all, this will be a massive investment for the building industry, helped by small grants and subsidies to the households to install a solar panel, to put in place double glazing, to install a high efficiency heating system in their homes, to use geothermal in the homes, etc. So very hands-on practical investments in households, in housing, and in public buildings. And of course, here the industry, the construction industry will benefit a lot. And I think it's a wonderful case of promoting green ambitions with involving industry and giving them a spin-off. I do think that a model like that is perfectly can be perfectly envisaged in Indonesia as well. Now, 2 or 3 other comments: how to boost investment in the climate, in in the greening of the economy. And here there's one very important thing to stress, and that it's about putting a realistic price on carbon. There is no way that you will create a level playing field for green producers and sustainable production on the one hand, and high CO2 content products on the other hand, without putting a price on carbon. There's no way that you're going to invest and get investors to invest in renewable energy unless renewable energy has an equitable and equal access and place in the energy market compared to fossil industry. Now, one very important tool that we have succeeded in using for decades now is the emissions trading system of the EU. It's been there for close to 2.5 decades. It has had its ups and downs and its teething problems, but we can now, with all conviction, say this has been an essential and key tool for raising finance for investment in the green agenda. So the European carbon market is the biggest of all, biggest in the world, and it has helped reduce emissions by about 35% in the past 15 years. It has generated 57 billion euros worth of green investment in the past 8 years. It has, in 2019 alone, it has generated revenues of 14 billion euros, and we expect something similar for the year 2020. The full figures aren't there, but it just goes to show that by applying a system consistently across the sectors involved, you can raise an awful lot of private sector money. You can push companies to motivate. Pushing is the wrong word even, but motivate companies to invest and raise investment by companies that can't invest by transferring the funding to other companies through the emissions trading scheme. So I do very much emphasize the usefulness also of this system in Indonesia, because at the end of the day, okay, the rich countries in the framework of the next COP and subsequently will have to come up with more public funding for the developing world, especially the least developing world. But in emerging countries like Indonesia, the main answer will have to come from the private sector investment through equitable schemes of carbon pricing and in emission trading system. So that is one important suggestion I would give for your consideration. And the second suggestion, and then I will stop, has to do also with the energy transition and with the renewable energy sector. For the large majority of countries, including the EU, this is the biggest challenge by far, and because it has to transform. It concerns transforming decades and decades of production histories. It involves major assets in terms of natural and mineral resources, etc. However, there's no other way about having to go through this energy transition. It goes for us in Europe, that goes for the Americas, it goes for Asia, and it goes to for Indonesia. Without an energy transition, you will not be able, nobody will be able to meet their climate targets and objectives. So for that reason, European Union has invested a lot in outreach with the Ministry of Energy, with the other ministries in the economic field, with the Parliament, for the discussions of the renewable energy law that is close to being adoption now, and for the discussions about the presidential decree and on renewable energy. And our core message is to say is that it is vital that those two pieces of legislation will create a level playing field for renewable energy and for fossil energy. Without such a level playing field, the companies tell me, the European firms in Indonesia and firms from outside tell me that their investment will stay on hold. There's no viable, economically viable prospect and justification for an investment in major renewable energy infrastructure at present, with the unequal, unlevel playing field for renewable and fossil. So my hope and the hope of European investors is very much that this unlevel playing field will be equalized, and that renewable energy can have an equal access to the grid and to the market compared to fossil. I speak, of course, on behalf of European investors, but I'm convinced that the question for other foreign investors, it will be exactly the same in the renewable sector. And I would very much suspect that also for domestic, for Indonesian investors, such a level playing field is essential for their investments in renewable energy sector. I stop there, and I hope that I've given you a few notions coming from Europe that might be of use for further policy thinking and for investment in Indonesia. Thank you very much indeed.
Mr. Ambassador, thank you for your keynote speech and your support.